Welcome to Talk of the Town. I'm your guest host, Wrestling Brewster, and this is show 405. And we'd like to first thank our underwriters, Cape Auto with Kevin Gallerani and David Gallerani, and Brewster PC Solutions. Let them take care of your technology so you can keep working. Like I said, I'm Wrestling Brewster, and we're here tonight to talk about the Harbor Plan. There's a lot of excitement about the Harbor Plan. The Harbor Plan's been going. I'd like to introduce Len Blaney, who is the chair of the Harbor Plan Committee, which is a subcommittee of the Harbor Committee, and Jack Wiggin from Urban Harbors. Welcome, guys.
Thank you,
Jack, can you tell us a little bit about what Urban Harbors is and what you guys do?
Urban Harbors Institute is a research institute at the University of Massachusetts in Boston, on the Boston campus. We have been in existence for 27 years. We were founded in 1989. And our purpose really is to do several things. One is to do applied research, always in the coastal and ocean areas. The second is to provide public service or technical assistance to government, largely in Massachusetts. So that's city and town government, state government, and the federal government. And the third thing is to do public education kinds of programs. And we do that around the coastal area as well.
And you've done a couple. What experience does Urban Harbors have with harbor plans? Who have you done some harbor plans before?
Yep, we have. In our 27 years, we've done 13 harbor plans for Massachusetts communities, from small communities like Rockport up through Fall River, New Bedford, Gloucester, the major ports in the Commonwealth. We've done 4 others in states in Maine, in Connecticut, New York. We did one in Florida. And we've also done about 15 other coastal plans, mostly natural resource protection plans, or plans about on a river estuary or whatever. So altogether, probably 33, 34 plans in coastal municipalities in Massachusetts.
And what would you say really is a harbor plan? What does it entail? The little nitty-gritty parts of a harbor plan?
Yep. The unique thing about a harbor plan is that it encompasses both the land side and the water side in a coastal community. So these are always done in a coastal community, and it's a plan that takes into account both the waterfront and the nearby ocean area, the coastal waters. And the purpose of the plan is really to take a look at that area from the point of view of what is going on in the water side, and then how that relates to what's going on in the land side. So in Plymouth's case, the planning area that has been designated is that part of the waterfront from really the Kingston border on the north, just north of Cottage Park, down to Long Beach, south of the town center, and then out into the water, picking up Saquesh, Clark's Island, Browns Bank, and then coming back along the eastern side of Long Beach. And so that land and water area is the area encompassed by the harbor plan. So it looks at the natural resources in that area, eelgrass, shellfish resources, tidal marsh and so forth, coastal water quality. But then it focuses a great deal on the human uses of the coast and the water. So commercial fishing, recreational boating, potentially aquaculture is a growing business on the waterfront. Public access is a big part of it. So what the harbor plan does is look at the existing conditions for human uses and natural resources, finds out what the community is interested in seeing happen in that area. What are the goals? What's the vision for the community for that waterfront area? And then we take that information together with data and information about the resources and about the uses, and then make recommendations about how to optimize uses of the waterfront, how to best protect those resources, and so forth.
So it's pretty all-encompassing. There's a lot to it. It's not just the water part, but it is how the water interacts with the land and the land-based businesses, and it really is pretty huge.
Yeah, and it's that relationship, between what goes on in the water area and what's supported for those activities on the waterfront, and that's really characterizes what a harbor management plan is. And it takes a look at the uses. It really takes a look at the decision-making processes. You know, as you can imagine, there's a lot of programs, there's a lot of regulations that are implemented by various boards and commissions at the local level in Plymouth, by state government, DEP, Coastal Zone Management, and then at the federal level as well with the Army Corps of Engineers, the Environmental Protection Agency, and so forth. All of those entities have some decision-making, some regulatory authority in the area that we're talking about, and it's important when you're trying to get something done to be able to coordinate that decision-making so that when a permit application, for example, that comes in that may need local, state, and federal approval, that there's a basis for those entities making that decision in a consistent way. That's what we try to do through the harbor plan. Give the community and the people who are seeking to do something in the community a common basis for getting the decision that they need.
Awesome. So Len, how did this harbor plan come about? You know, what was the impetus? Where did it come from?
Well, it originally came from the harbor committee itself. And for the last, say, 4 years or so, the chair, Phil Chandler, had kind of started reaching out to the different communities that neighbored, our neighboring communities that also bordered the water. And we wanted to kind of get shared resources, shared ideas and concerns. And so it started with that. And one of the things that we found out as we got into it was that each of these towns already had or were in the process of developing a harbor management plan. And the more we talked to them, the more we found out that the plan in and of itself, if you have one, helps you to go out and get resources, get grants and things like that we thought would be important for Plymouth. So we about a year ago, the Harbor Committee developed a subcommittee to look at that and see if a harbor plan would be a good fit for us, if it was something that had already been planned or not. So we started by talking to Lee Hartman and some people in town and said, do we have a harbor plan? And came back that Lee said, we don't specifically have a harbor plan. We have some plans, and there's a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but nothing specifically for a harbor plan, and thought that it would be a good, would be time well spent to put something together. And so that's how we decided to start working on finding somebody to put a plan together for us and working on what it entails and that type of thing.
Well, what are some of the challenges when starting to put a plan together that you've seen?
The first challenge, I think, for us was we wanted to make sure that we had community involvement, and because and we've done that in terms of we've had 4 community meetings. And our meetings have been very, very well attended. Mm-hmm. We've had 75, 80 people at our meetings, and that's kind of rare for meetings in Plymouth. And so we knew that we were on to something that people were concerned with. So what we did is we broke it out into, we started saying, okay, we want this to be open meeting. We want everybody to be able to attend, and we really want this to be your vision. We stressed the fact that it wasn't really the town's plan. It wasn't just the harbor master's plan. It wasn't just the harbor committee's plan or Jack and Urban Harbor's plan. It's your plan. It's the community's plan. And so I think one of the first challenges is making sure that we were able to and are able to get the vision that Plymouth as a community has for their harbor and what is important to them. And I think we've gathered a lot of information, especially because we had such great attendance, but it's still going to be a continued work in progress over the next year.
So, Jack, what are, you've done a bunch of these. Mm-hmm. So the challenges that you see, starting out, where we are on our plan and some of the challenges that you've seen or not seen?
Well, I think Len started out with the right one, and that is attracting enough public participation into the process to really make it reflective of what the community wants. And that would have been my number one challenge as well, and Len covered that, and I think Plymouth's done a very good job in doing that. There's been great participation in the process so far. The other thing that we need to do is to engage the other boards, commissions, and committees in in Plymouth to become part of that process as well. Because the other challenge is, as we're working on this plan for the waterfront, it's not being done in isolation. That waterfront is part of a larger community, and there are planning documents and other programs and initiatives that have been done that address the rest of the community. So the waterfront is really embedded in a larger context, and there are a number of plans that talk about those. North Plymouth has a recently done plan, and there's a downtown waterfront district plan that was done a number of years ago. So there's many plans that we have to ensure that we're consistent with, and that there are decision-making authorities, Board of Selectmen, Planning Board, Conservation Commission, and so forth and so on, that we need to make sure that they're engaged in the process and that we're consistent, that the policies in the harbor plan are consistent or at least compatible with those existing policies and initiatives of those boards and committees as well. The other challenge is there's a lot of information that needs to be gathered, and sometimes that data is existent, sometimes it's not, so we have to be able to determine whether it exists, and if not, can we gather it somehow or compile it somehow else. And because the plan is informed by people, but it's also informed by the information, empirical information that exists regarding resources and human uses as well. And then I think another challenge is, so we've identified from the public's participation what the issues in the community are that the plan is to take on. And then ultimately what that plan contains is recommendations for taking those on. And the recommendations really have to be both reasonable and also achievable. So one of the other challenges in putting together the plan, which we'll be coming to in a few months, is to craft those recommendations so that they are actually achievable, because no one wants to create a plan with a lot of great recommendations in it that just aren't going to go anywhere. So achievable means realistic, as well as the willingness of the community, whatever the appropriate entity in the community is, to take that on and to move it forward. And I think the last one I would mention is the complexity of the issues on the waterfront. They're all interrelated. So if you're talking about protecting natural resources, there may be people that take advantage of those resources. Sometimes you hear generally about fisheries, for example, and whether fisheries are overfished and what impact that has on the stocks and so forth. So on the one hand, you're trying to protect the natural resources, but on the other hand, you want to make sure that those people who rely on those resources for their living are able to keep doing that. So everything is interrelated on the waterfront, and that's a challenge too, to balance out the goals and balance out the policies and balance out the recommendations.
So what are some of the issues that were brought up I was at a bunch of the public meetings, and it was amazing to me, because when you have issues in the town of Plymouth, it's hard to get people to come out to it. And I think that the meetings that the Harbor Committee and the subcommittee have created were very well attended. I think that people were very engaging. And speaking of engaging, if you have any questions or you'd like to call in, 508-830-3971. But Len, tell us a little bit about some of the issues that came up during the Zoom meetings.
Well, obviously dredging is a big issue, and we realize that is a big issue and one that needs to be incorporated into the plan. There's a lot of different entities that play a part in dredging, and so we were looking at when was the last time different areas were dredged, who has the authority to dredge, how do we maybe go about getting some areas dredged and financed or draw our attention to it. And one of the first things of dredging is, in fact, having a harbor plan, because then we can go to the state, we can go to the federal government, we can go to whomever we need to and say, look, we have a plan, here is what it is. We're not just asking you, there's a plan, it's part of It is part of a plan that's sort of agreed to by the town. It incorporates everything from commercial fishing to recreational boating, and here's why we need it. And take that and use that with our Congress and our local representation to hopefully move it along further. Because we've been on a dredging list for 20 years, I think, and it hasn't happened. But we're hoping that with the harbor plan, that will push us a little further up that list. And then if we can draw a little bit more attention to it so that people do feel it's an important issue. So locally, I think that's a big issue for us.
because both Chad and David Gould have said when they go to the dredging things or go to the state and say, all right, we need to be put on this list, first thing they ask is, where's your harbor plan?
Exactly right.
And that was one of the things I noticed. But
Yeah. And that's what we found out right away. And
Yeah.
then in talking to the neighboring communities, that's what we realized is that we really need a plan. The other stuff that came up was sort of harbor safety and navigation, so not including the dredging part, but a little bit of congestion. The water quality was another issue that came up for us. Moorings were an issue. We talked a lot about tourism and bringing, could we bring or do something to bring more tourism to Plymouth? And wouldn't it be nice if one of these boats wasn't just leaving with a bunch of people from Plymouth and neighboring communities to go to P-Town? Wouldn't it be nice if they were coming here?
Yeah.
And how would we do that? And there's a number of plans out there that have talked about a marina and other components, and that's probably fairly far off if something like that happens. But there are other things that maybe we could look at that are less expensive. Maybe like a floating dock or something that could allow for the transient and could allow for larger boats to come in. Probably a tall ship or something like that to come and visit. And you're not talking about huge sums of money. And I'm not saying that that's happening, whatever. I'm just saying that it's another idea. So what we did here is a lot of ideas, and a lot of great ideas, and some not so great. But that's the idea, is to go out and get those ideas and sort of bring them back and see what makes sense in the plan. So tourism was another big thing. Climate change was talked about. Public access was huge. Talking about public access and making sure that everybody in the community, as well as everybody that visits Plymouth, has access to the waterfront and in a way that they can enjoy it. So, you want to jump in?
I think public access was a good one to talk about. People were talking about pedestrian access to the waterfront, vehicular access. So a lot of people drive down to the waterfront, and take a look at the view out over the ocean. And also access in terms of the commercial users who need to launch their boats and access the water for purposes of doing their business on a daily basis. So there's all kinds of different ways of looking for access. Len mentioned climate change. That came up, and it comes up in all communities these days, all coastal communities in particular. And it is a consideration and a concern, and I believe that the Harbor Committee will be interested in ensuring that there's that topic is covered in some manner in the Harbor Plan. There's projections for sea level rise, projection for storm surge hitting the coast more than they have currently.
Breach on the beach.
Breaching the beach, 2030, 2070, whatever that time horizon is. There are projections for all of that, and we'll try to build that into the plan. Not that it'll necessarily alter anything that's currently going on, but as investments are made, large investments are made in the future, they should take into account, the possibility or probability that there'll be some impact from climate change.
And a lot of people also were concerned that we would, and Plymouth as a whole, would continue to support the commercial fishermen and make sure that everyone understood how important they were to the community. And then also growing, aquaculture, growing a new business. And that's kind of exciting opportunity for Plymouth. And making sure that we are providing resources for them to be successful and to put a plan together that does that.
Number 3 in lobster for the state.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah,
that's with Gloucester.
That's pretty impressive
and New Bedford. And one of the impressive parts of that number is that both Gloucester and New Bedford they're long haulers. They go out, and they go out for a month at a time to bring in their catch. The entire Plymouth lobstermen's are all day. They go out for the day. And to come in number 3 with those big guys is a pretty huge thing. And I think that one of the things that, I hope that the harbor plan is going to really bring about is that how important our harbor is. That it is a very big fishing harbor. And it's got, a lot of recreation, but it's got a lot of business going on down there. And I think, we really need to focus on that. I think that that's an important part of this plan is really, showing the town that, yeah, you've got this harbor, we could be, Middleborough if we didn't have the harbor, and how important that harbor is, whether it's the fishermen or it's the recreation, but it's a pretty huge part of our town.
Yeah, I think you put your finger right on the essence of a harbor plan for any coastal community, and that is to give an appropriate amount of attention to an asset that exists only in coastal communities and that are important economically for the community, culturally for the community. These communities like Plymouth is an excellent example of that, is that your cultural identity has a lot to do with your location on the water in the harbor and so forth. And that really is what the harbor plan does. It puts an appropriate degree of focus on what turns out to be one of the town's premier assets.
Yeah. And it truly is. I mean, how many times you come down in the middle of the summer on a Wednesday night and it's a work night, but I bring my granddaughter down for an ice cream, you feel like you're on vacation.
Yeah.
It's just truly a great community. So we're blessed to be here. And I think, working on the plan, there's a number of people on the committee that I think truly feel that, being part of this committee and hopefully helping to produce a document that will, in essence, be a little bit of a living document, that every 5 years there'll be somebody reviewing this, making sure that we're sort of holding our feet to the fire, and if we have goals that the community wants to attain, that we're looking at those every 5 years or so and making sure that it's moving forward, and that things do change. So if we're also looking at it 5 years or 10 years from now, we say, well, this has changed, it's not really relevant anymore, and maybe we should be looking at something different. So I think we've never had anything that really put all of our plans together, and now we'll have a plan that can earmark, okay, well, this plan exists. Like, we're not going to put together a plan for the beach. There's a committee that does that. But Jack and his team will reference that plan so people know it exists and know it's part of that. And I think that that's important, because to bring all of the plans together in one sort of concise unit is important, especially as it relates to the waterfront there.
Yeah. I mean, we look at Plymouth, and I know you all know this better than I do, but the downtown commercial area is quite close to the waterfront. And while we draw our planning boundary right along the first street that runs along the waterfront, really that connection between the waterfront, for the purposes that Len was talking about during the summertime, where there's a lot of visitors coming into the community, and a lot of that focuses on the waterfront, but you really want to bring that level of visitation up into the downtown, obviously, to benefit the downtown retail and commercial users there. So there'll be that connection. This isn't just the waterfront. We don't. There's no boundary in the sense that we don't go beyond a particular area. We recognize the relationship between what goes on the waterfront and what goes on downtown Plymouth as well, and that connection will be made.
And that relationship is hugely important, and I think that, again, it's interesting to me the amount of press we've been getting for this harbor plan, because it was like, okay, we're going to start a harbor plan, and then we had our first meeting and 75 people showed up. Mm-hmm. So it's something that is important to a lot of people, and I think that the town as a whole has said, this is kind of important. And I think that relationship that, I think that the merchants of the town really need to realize that relationship with the harbor and the downtown. And it's the people on Main Street, they don't always realize, all right, how much money are we generating because we're a harbor community? And I think that's an interesting thing that will come out with this, that it'll show, yeah, because you're a harbor community, you're getting these people who are coming here because it's on the ocean. And they, they're not going inland to get seafood. They're coming to Plymouth, and I think that's an important part of this plan.
I agree.
So, Jack, just a little bit more about a harbor plan in general. Is this more of a short-term or a long-term plan?
Yeah, that's a good question. Plans always have some planning horizon. Len mentioned that looking at a 5-year time horizon for this plan. I think years ago, comprehensive plans, master plans for communities used to suggest that they're being written for a 10-year period. But in recent times, things change so quickly that 10 years actually became too long a time to try to project what was going to happen. So I think most plans really have a shorter time frame now, although 5 years isn't a short period of time. But the plan will have recommendations that are to be carried out. So say if there were 50 recommendations or 100 recommendations in the plan when it was completed, some percentage of those will be short-term recommendations to be carried out over the next year or two, some mid-term recommendations, 3 or 4 years, longer-term recommendations, maybe 5 years or even more than that. But all of the plans that we've done really have broken out very consistently into that kind of thing. There are long-term recommendations because some things are more complicated and more expensive than other things. So they're just going to take longer to do. Other things, and we're beginning to identify them through the public process, are short-term fixes that can be undertaken relatively quickly, whether they're regulatory kind of changes or seeking grant funds to do some particular project or whatever. Some of those things can be done in a relatively short period of time. And it's also always valuable to get some early kind of accomplishments in when you're doing a plan so that people think, oh, this does achieve something. It was worth doing. And I'm quite certain that Plymouth will find that to be the case.
Yeah. And I think recently David Gould and Chad Hunter, the harbor master, had mentioned that in their talks with the state, they're already getting a little bit more attention because, we heard you're working on a harbor plan.
Yeah.
And that's going to be incorporated in your plan. And so we're already seeing a little bit of that, and I'm excited about what that's going to do for us as a whole long term.
Yeah.
I think that's really going to open up some things, opportunities for us.
So, Len, you talked about it being a living document, and you're talking about short-term, long-term. How do you see that implementation? And I think that the committee really wants this to be more than just a document that we've got a harbor plan. How do you move that forward? How do you see implementation, and how do you see we've done this, this is where we're supposed to be? How do you see that formulating over the years?
Well, part of it goes back to getting the public involved in it so that there's some buy-in there generally throughout the community. I talked about the boards and committees and officials and staff that work for Plymouth, having them engaged so that they're not only aware of what's in the plan, but they help shape what's in the plan. And once they're sort of vested into those ideas, then I think the assumption is that you're going to get a lot of allies beyond the Harbor Committee that are interested in moving forward the recommendations that came out of this planning process. And that's really it. So the last part of the plan will be an implementation matrix where we'll have all of those recommendations. There'll be a column, so those recommendations will be prioritized in the plan, identified who is responsible for that in the sense that it's their jurisdiction or it's their purview. So and they'll know that. There'll be no surprises in that. They'll have been involved in putting that recommendation together. Then there'll be a time frame for it, and then if something costs money, a revenue generation, then there'll be some notion of where that money may come from, whether it's a state, federal grant program or whatever else it takes. Not everything costs money. Some things just takes an effort to put it together. So that's how it gets implemented. We have some great examples. We did a plan in Nantucket probably 5 or 6 years ago, and that they have a harbor plan implementation committee that meets monthly and goes through that matrix of recommendations, sees what's been done, takes on, figures out what they're going to be able to do for the coming year. In some cases, they eliminate a recommendation because over time, you mentioned this earlier, Len, it's not quite as relevant as it was 5 years ago, so they'll eliminate that. But they've really pretty much worked their way through 3/4 of the recommendations in the plan. That's pretty unusual, and But more and more communities are looking at their plans that way, that the plan, as you said earlier, is not just a document that has this material in it. It is a document that is being used to improve the community.
Yeah.
And I think what's important is that the genesis of the whole plan came out of the Harbor Committee itself, which really are just volunteers, people of the community, not necessarily the town. And then we've worked with the town from that point. So the Harbor Committee formed the subcommittee. Then they went out and got the initial funding, because the plan.
Yeah, if you could talk a little bit about how this is being paid for, how Harbor pays.
Well, the plan was the cost of the plan was $45,122. The subcommittee was able to get a grant from PGDC to put the first $13,000 of the plan, and that sort of got us going. And then in our conversations with Jack, said, "Okay, we'll work with you and we'll make it happen." And then Chad Hunter and David Gould went out to the Mass Seaport Economic Council, and were able to get a grant for the balance of that. So in essence, the town really hasn't paid or anything. So it hasn't come out of the taxes, whatever. It's a plan that sort of is generated by the community and by the grants and by participation by town employees as well as the volunteers on the committee. So I think that's hugely important, that we get everybody working on the same page, and that's not always possible in communities. It works better at times than at other times. It just does, and we have to acknowledge those challenges. But if we can get everybody behind it, and I think, as you said earlier, we had a lot of people there, and people started seeing it and saying, at the town level, and saying, wow, this is important to our community, with all these people that are showing up. So I think that sort of helps generate that additional support. And moving forward, as we do the additional interviews with the town and the different departments, in order to put the plan together, I think we'll hopefully get that cohesion where we can put a plan that is truly from the community and the town and sees both areas. Because I personally wouldn't support any plan that a community wouldn't support. I don't care if the town manager wants it. I don't care who wants it. I want a plan that is supported by the community.
Right.
Plain and simple.
Right, and I think when Jack first came in and he says, okay, these are the steps we've got to take, and we've got to have at least 3 public meetings, I was like, wow, okay, really? We're going to ask the public, be careful what you ask for. But it was interesting to watch how the meetings, kind of formulated themselves, where, there were parts of the meeting where, it's a complaining session where everybody's saying, I want more moorings and I want this. But out of those discussions came a lot of good stuff where it was like, we really think that, we need to look into dredging. We need to look into, more docket space, more mooring space. How can we do this? And it was, it was interesting to see how those meetings really formulated how you guys are making this plan.
Yeah, no, there's no question about it that the driver, it comes from the community itself, and of course now that we've established that process, there's probably a level of expectation in the community that the plan will be reflective of the kind of input that we received, and I believe for the most part it certainly will be. There's no reason to think that it won't be. I mean, that's all plans, particularly the harbor plans that we've worked on, are really driven by the issues that are identified in the community. So there's no cookie cutter plan. You start by figuring out what is it about this harbor, this planning area, that people want to see improvements made, and that's what the plan addresses. So we've identified, or in the process of identifying the issues. The Harbor Plan Committee will now take a look at all of those issues, probably prioritize them for the plan, and then the contents of the plan really will be written around those issues. So if there's an issue, as Len was saying, dredging was a big issue, a lot of our background research then will be on what has been the history of dredging and what are the opportunities for dredging and so forth. And the whole plan reads like that. It's really based on what the issues that were identified are, and we don't go into a great deal of detail on things that no one's talked about. It's really, the plan really talks about the things that people want to see addressed.
And that's why when we were doing our meetings, the 4 meetings we did, we kept saying, look, our job right now isn't really to tell you this is going to be in the harbor plan, this is going to be in the harbor plan. It's really to sit back here and listen and hear from you. What is it that's important to you? What would you like to see built into the plan? And what would you like to see included in the plan? So I think that's, and it's important to know right now, no decisions have been made yet. We've just gathered the information, and that's what we did for those last meetings. I was gathering all that information, and we have a ton of it. And now we have to start sorting it through and finding out what makes sense, what is feasible, what isn't feasible, what is a great long-term goal. It's not feasible today, but maybe it is later on. All right, let's figure what that is and figure out how to maybe attain it. So, and then also, as Jack mentioned, what are the wins? What are the things we can do now that are going to make an impact and that we have a window of opportunity to kind of take advantage of. With 2020, I think that gives us a little bit of an advantage on certain things as well. And although this is not a plan designed for 2020, it's for beyond that. We recognize that 2020 is happening, and we hope to take advantage of that. We're hoping that, with the 2020 and the fact that we have the plan, that we can go out and we can get some other resources and help us with the 2020 for ways that will help in tourism and everything else, as well as the commercial industry.
So what do you hope the plan will do? What are your goals, or what do you see this plan doing?
I see developing guidelines for the town long term, so that whether I'm here, you're here, Jack's here, whether any individual selectman, manager, anything are there, that we have a plan, a book, something that they can go to. If you're new here, you can say, you know what, it's all here, it's in the plan. So we have a guideline that the community knows what that has already vetted out, discussed everything, and they have a plan that is a guideline that says, okay, here's my goals, here's where the community wants to go with it, here's the plan, how do I get that? And each year will be different, and you're going to have to go to get funding at times, you're going to have to go get grants at times, but if you don't put it down on paper, you don't have much of a chance of getting what you want. If you put it down on paper and put it in writing, and you put a plan together, you know what? You can get a lot more than you think you can. So the number one thing is just let's get it written down. Let's have a full plan. Let's make sure it's vetted out by everybody, that everyone gets their chance and their opportunity to have a say on it. Public, town, everybody, and then at the end of the day, let's put forth the best agreement that we can come together with.
Awesome. And again, if you have any questions, please give us a call, 508-830-3971. So Jack, is that attainable?
What Len was talking
What
about?
Len was talking about?
Absolutely, yeah. I won't say every plan that we've done has been equally successful, but every community they work with, I think, was happy that they had gone through the process and they had the plan that they did, and there's no question that every one of those has achieved more than they would have without it. Yeah, and I mean, it comes into the, if we looked at each of those issues independently, dredging, for example, I think what this plan will position Plymouth to do is to get Plymouth's share of whatever resources are available for dredging, whether it's at the federal or state level. So something will happen there. People are talking a lot about improved access to the waterfront. I guarantee you something will happen there, just because of the way people talk about it so strongly. They're talking about more moorings, more transient boater opportunities, building the economy based on the marine resources that you have. That will happen. So when we look back at this 5 years from now, 6, 7 years from now, I think people will look and say, oh yeah, this is better than it had been, and we're moving in the direction that the community wants to move in. I mean, that's really all you can expect from a plan.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So.
And it is the guidelines and everything else. I go back to the focus that I think that this will bring to the town of Plymouth on the harbor, because it's you have a balance, but in the past the town has said, oh yeah, we've got a harbor, oh yeah, we've got a bunch of fishermen and some lobstermen, and they do their thing down there. And oh, we got some recreational boaters. But you look at the opportunities that people coming to the town of Plymouth, tourists coming to the town of Plymouth. Well, there's a big boat that's hopefully coming back in June, but there's a big boat that really brings people to the harbor. And when you're looking out at the harbor, the opportunities for that harbor to produce more tourism, and it really needs to be, looked at. And I think that part of that is this plan bringing about a little more focus towards that.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Really
I agree.
teaching out those things.
Yeah.
So what's the next steps in this process?
Well, the Harbor Committee, I guess, will meet monthly, right? From here on in, we've been talking about for a while now. The public has given us their input on the issues. Those issues will be taken up by the Harbor Committee, prioritized, and then we will begin. Urban Harbors will begin gathering and compiling the background information that I was talking about earlier, sort of building the plan from the bottom up. Again, all oriented towards addressing those issues. That'll probably take place over the next 2 or 3 months. At the same time, based on the issues people have identified, we'll develop draft goals and policies for each one of those issue areas. And then we'll bring those drafts to the Harbor Committee. They'll vet those, refine them, change them, throw them out, whatever. But we'll end up with a group of goals and policies that will direct the plan. At that point, we'll go back to the public because they'll want to see that. They'll want to see what those goals and policies look like, what direction that we're going in. The public will have input on that. There'll be some changes for that. And then we'll begin to write the recommendations that go along with those goals and policies that address the issues, and then go through the same process. The Harbor Committee will review them, refine them. Then they'll go out to the public for their impression of them, and they'll be refined again, and at that point, we'll be close to having a plan.
Awesome. We've got a caller. Welcome.
Thank you for taking my call. I was just curious, with the transportation grant and the improvements to Cottage Park and the water frontage they have down there, is that included in the harbor study?
Yes, yeah, the Cottage Park is definitely in the harbor planning area. We've talked to the people up there. We've reviewed the plans that have been done in the past there, and yeah, it's potentially a great opportunity there.
And there was some discussion about a ferry service or some kind of shuttle from North Plymouth to the harbor. It was brought up a couple times, the ferry service from Boston to Plymouth. So that there was a great deal of discussion on transportation.
All right, well, thank you very much. I was just curious, so thank you.
You are welcome. Thank you. Thanks for calling. If anybody else wants to call, please call. We got 508-830-3971. So you've got a whole bunch of information, and how do you take that information and go through the minutia and feather out the stuff that's not needed?
Yeah.
And that's a pretty big undertaking.
It is.
That's what you guys do.
It is. That's what we do. It's an iterative process. We'll gather all of the information. We want, obviously, the most current information, so a lot of it gets weeded out through that process. But again, it relates to what those issues are. So if the information that we're trying to gather shines light on those issues, then it gets included. If it becomes extraneous, if it's useful, we'll leave it in there. If it's just not relevant to what the plan is after, then probably gets left aside. A lot of the plans that we do serve the purpose not only of goals, policies, and recommendations and so forth, but it's also a sort of a repository of information of what existed, say, economically in the town at that time that the plan was created, so that when somebody down the road goes back to redo that plan, that information's there already, and all they're doing is building on it. This is the first harbor plan that Plymouth has, so this will require us to do a little bit more background work than might otherwise be required, but that's fine. I mean, and so if you look at some of the other communities' plans, what you'll see is long descriptions of what the dredging history of the community has been, which is relevant to today's situation, but not entirely. But it's really useful to have that information pulled together in one place so that if you ever want to go back and figure it out, it's all there for you. A lot of times when we start these, one of the biggest hurdles is that the information isn't readily available to anybody. So if anybody's ever trying to put together an application for a permit or an application for a grant, they really have got to dig around for information. So hopefully it'll help in that way too. Information will be brought together in one place that will be useful to a lot of people for a lot of different reasons.
Sorry.
That's okay.
So, where can you find out more information about the harbor planning process?
Okay, well, we always have the slide up at the at our public meetings.
Yep.
There is some information on the Harbor Masters webpage, the Town of Plymouth Harbor Masters webpage. Len always gives out his email address for people who would like to provide input into the planning process. There's also a harbor plan email address that people can send comments to. And those could be comments or questions about what happens next on the thing. In terms of meetings, those the Harbor Committee meetings are publicly noticed meetings, so you can always see when they're occurring. And I would imagine that the plan will be on the agenda for most of those meetings over the coming year.
The subcommittee meeting. Subcommittee will be meeting separately from the Harbor Committee.
Which is a public meeting.
They're both public meetings, yes.
Yep. And then a gentleman that came to a couple of the public meetings asked that we put the material in the public library. So that's been done. There's not much there yet because not much has been developed yet. But as each piece is drafted in a form that's acceptable to the Harbor Committee, that will go in the library so people can go there and find it as well.
And what they can do is if you want to just sort of see what a harbor plan might look like, you can go on the Harbor Masters website and then just link on over to Urban Harbors and take a look at one of the plans that have been done from one of the other communities and get a sense of what's in there, what does it entail. So that might be a good start.
I think that would be good.
You know, for you to do that. If you're looking for information on it, it's Plymouth Harbor Plan at gmail.com. If you email Plymouth Harbor Plan at gmail.com. That would go over to Kristen, who is
my colleague,
a colleague of Jack's, and she can make sure that the committee gets it and gets back to you with the information. And even if you wanted to email me at lblaney, EBLANEY, .plymouthharborplan@gmail.com, I'd be happy to.
We've got another phone call. Welcome.
Good evening. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
My question is a simple one. I assume that aquaculture is included in the harbor plan. Just out of curiosity, I'd like to know, first of all, who determines where it's going to be, what could be put in there, and what the fee would be to use that? Because I assume that most of the fish that we're eating is no longer live or out in the sea. Most of it's farm raised. So is that where the committee comes in? Is determining the usage of a certain parcel of land and what the regulatory fee would be on using that land for that particular product?
Basically, the licensing and what's decided that the Harbor Committee meets with the Harbor Master. Harbor Master has the final say. The town actually does, but with the licensing
in the Natural Resources
and the
Department.
Natural Resource Department.
For the town.
Yeah. We had a bunch of meetings on the aquaculture and where to put
With the plots of
plots of land, how big the plots were going to be. The fee structure came from the Natural Resources Division. So most of the stuff comes from the Harbor Master and the Natural Resources Division. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. So my other question would be, now you mentioned that you wanted to do some dredging. When you're dredging the harbor, are those places that are already designated to do growing of fish and products, is that put into the equation where that silt and stuff won't bother them? Or is that
Yes.
Something
Yeah.
that you just
Yeah,
Yes.
that's definitely taken in.
Or decide.
Now, it would only be areas that have been previously dredged, number one, and it would take into account any of the aquaculture areas. You know, there wouldn't be dredging going in an aquaculture area, nor would the town set up an aquaculture area in a dredging area. So that has been looked at and will be considered for any dredging project.
Yeah, because the town of Plymouth, the harbor committee, the harbor master, and the town of Plymouth itself is taking aquaculture very seriously. You know, we know it's an up and coming industry, and we're very careful about making sure that that is all protected. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Have a great night.
Thank
you,
you.
Tim.
Thank you for calling. So, where were we? How can people participate in the planning process if they've missed the public meetings?
Well, the public meetings that we've had thus far are only the beginning of the public meetings. There'll be public meetings held throughout the process as at a point in time in the plan where it would be useful to bring people back together again, like when the goals are drafted, when the policies are drafted, when the recommendations are drafted. There'll be a series of meetings just like the first ones so that people can see what's been done and be able to comment on it and input into that. They can also, as Len was talking about earlier, email any of us with comments or questions or input, and we, in that way, they can become involved in it. But the public process goes on throughout the development of the plan.
It was interesting when we started getting into this, and you spoke about how much the public is involved in this. It really shows the buy-in because when you come finally with the document that is this harbor plan, like Len has said, it's not the harbor master's plan. It's not the town's plan. It is the town as a whole's plan. Right. And I think that's where the buy-in is when you come with a document, and the fact that your public meetings have been very well attended means that it's an important thing, but it's also that there was a voice. There was a voice for the fishermen. There was a voice for the landowners. There was a voice for all the entities involved, which I think is, like you've said, is an important part of this and really builds it. You can see how that is the cornerstone of.
Because everybody involved in putting the plan together is interested in something happening as a result of the plan.
Right.
So knowing that, you've got to have all that buy-in. If something's going to happen, it's worth the time and the effort to do it that way.
Yeah.
And there are other plans that existed that affect the waterfront or border the waterfront, and it's not, those plans haven't gone away. They may be sitting on a shelf or whatever, but Jack at Urban House was provided with the plans that were available to us. We provided, and so those will be reviewed as well, and I'm sure maybe that will actually dredge up some interest in some of those plans again.
Intended.
Yes, exactly.
Or not.
So yeah, and I think that's helpful for the town and for those plans that maybe have been a little bit dormant, and maybe this brings the focus back to the waterfront. And I do think it's been historically for the town of Plymouth a little bit of an undervalued asset. And the idea is, let's bring our focus back to the water. And or at least put more focus on it, because I think there's a lot of people that live here that feel truly connected to the water.
Oh yeah. And is that something that you've seen with most of your harbor plans, where there is a little more focused, or have you seen that it's already focused there on most of the places that you've?
It varies, Wrestling. Some places, the community really is identified by its waterfront and by its harbor. So in those cases, not so much. But in other cases, it's as Len was talking about, maybe underappreciated. And I was saying the people in Plymouth don't appreciate their harbor. But there is an elevated interest and appreciation of the waterfront, and that's what I think we'll try to achieve here. Because it is a great asset for the community. There's no question about it.
Oh, yeah. And the amount of focus and the amount of buzz that this has created, I've been really impressed with, when we started the committee, the subcommittee, it was like, okay, bunch of us will get together in a room, and we'll talk about the harbor, and we'll form some plan. But the buzz that it started to, that town hall started to get interested because of the interest in the town that it really created. And I think that shows, that, okay, this is going to be a huge plan that, that's going to be able to force issues that I think that both Chad and David have said in different times that that all of those things that they go to get grants for, and when they go to different entities, they're like, all right, well, what's your harbor plan? They keep bringing this harbor plan up, and I know that the harbor committee has been talking about it for years, and it's one of those things that to get going, what's your first step? And I think that having urban harbors on board was our first major step, where we kind of pushed it and says, all right, we're hiring, some professionals here.
Yeah.
So.
And it's nice, at least in my opinion, that we're part of a public university, University of Massachusetts, and part of the mission of that institution is to provide assistance to governments in the Commonwealth, and so we are happy to be able to serve that purpose.
So, and as we know, we're not just looking at dredging. We are looking at the public access. We are looking at, recreational and the mooring fields, everything else, the facilities that are here now. Maybe what are some good uses for some of the land that's even owned by the town? I mean, what would better serve the community as a use of certain things? So we're looking at everything, and it's not just limited to any one piece. Anything, if it sort of connects to the harbor, to the waterfront, or in the water, it's something that needs to be addressed or at least looked at, and then sorted through. Does it make sense to grid out the mooring field and redo it? Does it make sense instead to do a different type of mooring? And then what are the problems with that? In terms of what moorings are there, and how would you handle that? But and then looking at the aquaculture as a new business, looking at how you support the commercial fishermen. So there's a ton of different areas that we're looking at. And so we're not taking a micro approach; we're taking a big approach.
Awesome. So that's all there is about all you wanted to know about the harbor plan. Thanks for showing up. And if you see Ken and Karen around town, make sure to say hi. And we'll see you in 7. And have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Leslie, thank you.